Greetings. My name is Richard Agler. I'm a rabbi, retired rabbi, rabbi emeritus, scholar emeritus from another congregation. The last few years, I've been responsible for a couple of books. This one called The Tragedy Test, Making Sense of Life-Changing Loss, A Rabbi's Journey. And I wrote that one as an individual. And this one I co-edited with a previous guest of yours, Brendan. With
Rabbi
Sonsino, and it's called The God We Can Believe In. And we have 27 rabbis and scholars who contributed essays to that volume on that theme. This has been a subject, these two are linked, tragedy and belief, on how they come together and how they come apart very often. And that's a little bit of an introduction to it.
Can I ask then, because you kind of introduced the two books together and you said this first one was, I wrote that solo, it was more personal. The second one co-edited with the rabbi. What is the through line from the tragedy test to here? And maybe you could talk a little bit about the tragedy test, where that came from, and why also you decided why to co-write one after doing one.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me start at the beginning. Unfortunately, it's a tragic story. My wife and I, we have 3 children. One of them we lost tragically. Our daughter Talia was 26 years old. She lived and worked in Washington. She had a career in international development. She was beautiful, vibrant, successful, engaged, wanted to make the world a better place. And she went out for a jog one evening after work, was struck by a motor vehicle, and this tragically ended her life in this world, so to speak. That was horrific, and it affected us on every imaginable level, emotionally, personally, psychologically, family-wise, but also religiously. And all of a sudden, how do I come to terms with this? As a religious person, obviously I was a rabbi, I am, and I was at that point in my life an arguably mature rabbi. These are not new questions. Why do good people endure tragedy and so forth? That it goes back a very long way in Jewish and really every religious tradition. And what I had been kind of holding on to, and by the way, I was a congregational rabbi for 35 years. And so I dealt with this with members of my congregational family many, many times. And I always kind of felt that I did as best I could. I never felt up to the challenge, frankly, but I always did.
Okay. Can I ask about, I want to ask, you mentioned, there's a long history, again, of the most famous, the Book of Job, but I'm wondering, you're describing experiences where other people have had this happen, where it comes unexpectedly, or this is a really good person, and why do these terrible things happen? You're saying, was this a case in pastoral care where it felt like a gapping, where there was a separation between what you firmly believed and what you were telling people? And in this case, did you have to back off a little bit from, I'm not sure what I firmly believe, when you were counseling?
Yes and no, not exactly.
Okay.
So, great question. When we're in that kind of a relationship, it comes under the heading more or less of crisis counseling. And in a crisis counseling, you're just trying to get through the crisis. And, people are at all emotional loose ends and so on. And you're trying to keep them together, and you're trying to hold them together, and they've got a funeral to go through, and Shiva and then Shloshim and whatever. And that's kind of the pastoral role, I imagine in all faiths, when these kinds of things happen, whether they're tragic deaths or not so tragic deaths, And so the question of what do I believe or what do they believe rarely entered the picture, at that point. And on the infrequent occasions, it did occasionally, but infrequently,
But a lot of times it was people wanted to know what to do.
Exactly. They knew the immediate things, and the belief questions come later. And so, that was kind of the answer to that question.
Did that same experience, was that mirrored in your own personal experience where there was a lot of doing in the beginning and
Yes.
stuff came later?
So in the beginning, right, we just had to get through it. I mean, and we had, oh my gosh, we were supported lovingly and collegially and congregationally in beautiful and supportive and give. We couldn't have asked for more. And then after the dust settles, those other things start to rise their head. How could this have happened? This was not supposed to be. We did everything right. Not perfectly, of course, but right. And she was so good. And how could this possibly, all of that. And I, with all my rabbinic training, at that point, and it was 2025, it was 13 years ago. I didn't have the answers for myself. I knew lots of what tradition had to say. I could teach classes on it, very, very easily. And then all of a sudden, when it's me, when it hits you between the eyes, or when it hit me between the eyes, and grabs you by the throat, I realized I wasn't up to it. So what I did was I sat down to write. And that was my therapy, so to speak. And that was my coming to terms with it. And, they say sometimes write what you know. I think better advice, and it certainly was for me in this case, is write what you want to know. And so I wrote, this is what.
So you felt like you were starting with questions. I'm writing and I've got questions.
Yeah, big time. And so where do I go from here? And the writing was not just writing; it was exploring and it was learning. And this would lead me here, and I would start reading that, and so on and so forth. And I didn't know where it was going to go or how it was going to go, but I just needed. I knew that's not what I needed to do. That was my way of coping with upset, all through my rabbinate, really, and through my life. But nothing had upset me as much as this. Nothing, not even remotely close. I would joke that, when something would upset me when I was in the pulpit, I would write about it and then dump it on the congregation, let them deal with it. I had worked it through. Okay, maybe this might help them work through more seriously, the issue as well. But yeah, this was way more than a sermon. This required, a whole lot. So anyway, to make a long story short, and it was a long story, I wrote for 2 years, and then I stopped. I said, I think I'm done. But what I had written was a lot of good stuff, and I didn't know while I was writing, I didn't know what it was going to be. It might have just sat in the computer.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was ever a plan. Like, I think I want to, somewhere along the line, I've made this thing and I need to share it.
Well, I imagined I would share parts of it. Like I said, it might have been a series of blog posts. It might have been a series of classes. It might have been an article or two. But when I got to that 2-year point, I said, I think there's a book in here. And it was totally disorganized because that was, what I had written. Yeah. So it took me another 2 years to organize it, and another year to prepare it for publication. So the tragedy test, the title, it just is worth a moment. As I've explained to you now, I was not passing the tragedy test when I began this to write. And that's why I sat down to write. I was faced with a tragedy. I was not passing it. Certainly not religiously, intellectually, spiritually, etc. Maybe in other ways I was, but not that way. So that's a good question that we ask ourselves. Are you passing the tragedy test? Is your faith passing the tragedy test? Is your God passing the tragedy test? And on all three counts, the answer for me was no. By the time I got through that, I wouldn't say that I aced it, but I'm doing much better than I was.
Is there something, so saying, does your faith pass it, is your, however you define that, is that just how you feel about it? So if I feel that I've passed it, or somewhere along the way, there were sort of benchmarks or checkpoints that said, I think I was, there was an unhealthy pain here, or an unhealthy grief, or an unhealthy confusion. And now I feel like even if there's confusion, it's now a healthy confusion or a healthy grief. Or
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe
I want you to grade your tragedy test, I guess.
Yeah. Well, put it this way. I kind of came to different understandings of my faith and my God. And these were understandings that I could embrace with integrity, and, genuine. Okay, this makes sense to me. This coheres, and I can continue Jewish life, or life as a Jew, with these understandings. Now,
can I ask about that? So that personal, coming to a personal understanding, I was wondering about that, because the thing that fascinates me about Rabbi Sonsino's books, I've read one twice, another one I'm in the middle of, is he can express, he doesn't have to agree with these theologians to be able to cogently explain and express what is really interesting or what makes them something I want to highlight here. So I'm wondering, in the second book, that tragedy test is about your encounter with Judaism and coming to a God you believe in. Now this other one is like, here's a bunch of gods you could believe in, which is it hard to keep your God out, or was that easy work?
So great question. So you asked before, the second book, we've got 27 people contributing into it. What I say is I got smart and got other people to write it for me. That's what I did, with Rifat, of course. So what we learned, along the way is interesting. We went around searching for people who might want to contribute an essay on a God that I can believe in, a God we can believe in. And most of us, in fact, pretty much all of us, use different language. We have different schemas or different paradigms or different whatever. But at the end of the day, we all kind of agree on quite a number of points. And as far as I'm concerned, they're the major ones. That God does not intervene in our lives. God does not come down and manipulate things, not for us personally and not for us collectively. And that's a belief that we all share. We share.
Can I ask about that? Because why did you start? Why would you start it with the one that is the countervailing point to like this formative part of Judaism, which is follow me because a miracle was done, and now you're like, well, we don't believe in the interventionist God. How did everybody square that? How does that get squared?
Yeah. Well, okay. Great. Right. I start with that one because that's the big one. So you want to talk about the big one? Let's talk about the big one. That's okay. First of all, let's say that the mythological, I think that was the word you used, and which we can call also our sacred texts, our sacred narratives, the things that we celebrate on holidays, on Shabbat, they're filled, are our sacred texts, they're filled with, statements like this. And yet, when we kind of look around, we have no evidence for this. And we certainly have a God that we want to say is a God of justice, and a God who is all powerful, and a God who is all caring and knowing and loving, and so on and so forth. And yet, I'm sure everybody who's ever thought of this has said, well, what about the Holocaust? Why was there no intervention there? That of all times. And we can go on. What about 9/11? What about October 7th? What about pediatric cancer? What about adult dementia? I mean, right? And so we anybody with any kind of a viewpoint or any kind of experience, never mind, who's observed just the world as it is, will look at that and say, either God is out to lunch, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but God is just disengaged, let's put it that way, or God is not. And if God is supposed to act that way. So we have all these sacred texts, which are mostly quite ancient. And okay, they serve their mythological purposes. They say, for example, that God is on the side of the just. Okay, we can all live with that.
Right.
And but that God, actually intervenes in our lives to do so. Maybe the best you can say is maybe once upon a time that was so, but it sure as heck isn't now. And so, yeah. So expecting God to do those kinds of things for us is going to lead only to disappointment and disillusionment.
Okay, that's interesting, because I think what you're saying, you did bring it all the way around right there to, you have a belief about God, but bring it around to, what does that actually mean to your practice daily? Are you expecting a God to fix this for you? And then I'm like, oh, then you're right. As you start the circle again, I believe in an interventionist God, or I'm wrestling with that to come around. Like, what does it mean if you do? What does that actually mean in your day-to-day if you do? It seems like for some people, it gives some people at least talk about it and believe it. And it seems to motivate them to lead these rewarding, thriving, flourishing lives. That there is a God who cares directly about me. And if I do good things will be done. But the world is also complicated. And there's lots of things in it. So maybe things feel bad to me, but in some other way, they're not. So they find a way to square this circle themselves. But what you're saying is, oh, you don't have to. There's this other vision you could go with.
Well, yeah, listen, what works for people works for people. But that didn't work for me. And it doesn't work for a lot of us. I'm not averse to saying this, that, we've seen surveys in recent years, especially, where the fastest growing religious denomination is none, N-O-N-A, none of the above. And, I am quite sure that a significant proportion or percentage of those nuns, not N-U-N, but N-O-N-E, are there because the God beliefs, notions, teachings, whatever you might want to call them, that they've been subjected to, whether in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, in lots of places, again, they don't cohere with our observed reality. So it's, that's something that's definitely that's going on out there. So yeah, if you can find a way to square the circle within your own belief system, I'm not here to change it. Please, whatever, life is, yes, complicated, difficult, whatever gets you through it, God bless.
Okay, I stopped you on the big one, but you said there were other shared things. I don't want to interrupt what other things did everybody who wrote these essays kind of agree on?
Well, does God really answer the prayers of the deserving? Okay. Please, and it's a subset maybe of intervention, but, and I'll speak personally again. And I have a saying when I talk about this, it's all politics is local and all theology is personal. So, and I think that's a truth. But anyway, listen, if I had one prayer, it was that my children would be, safe and protected and thrive and live and so forth. And those were my prayers, and so, and I'm not the only one, I understand that. But yeah, so go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to ask, this does lead, eventually I want to talk about the learning guide, which I thought was fascinating. But you mentioned in one of the things in the learning guide that comes with this, tefillot shav, so empty prayer. So talking about something that's already happened and that can't, in some ways, I think there'd be some argument theologically, if we dig back to the route, these are prayers this is something that cannot happen. It's too... So tell me your understanding of empty prayers. Like you're saying, I would make this prayer, and then some rabbis would say, you can make that prayer, but it's an empty prayer. You can't expect that to happen. You can't ask God to do that.
So this is fascinating. And again, good for you for circling in on this. In the Mishnah, okay, which is a 3rd century Jewish law code, there's a statement that says, if you're approaching your town, if you're coming from out of town and you see your town, and you're coming back to your village and you see a house burning, you should not say, oh, please do not let that, you should not pray, let not that be in my house. Why? Because it's already been determined. All right. And similarly, I think in the same Mishnah, if you're pregnant or if your wife is pregnant, you should not say, oh, may this child be one gender or the other. Same reason. because it's already been determined. So there's a rabbinic statement that is olam kaminhago noheg. The world behaves according to its rules. Okay? In other words, that fire is going to burn. And that child is going to be whatever the chromosomes, determine it to be. And period, end of discussion. So don't pray for things that are already determined, Okay. When you look at the prayer book, and you look at it seriously, how many of them we can say, are there? I talk about God in the tragedy test as a God of law and spirit. Okay. And the law are the laws of the universe by which all of us live, or we don't live at all. And there are cause and effect, and there's biology and chemistry and mathematics and physics. And these are the laws. And this is, and you can understand that as God. Okay. And I think Spinoza did this very much. This is nature, and nature is the law. So, to understand that God has not, does not, and will not, or certainly does not and will not. If you want to, again, keep the mythological beliefs of the past, I'm not going to fight with that at the moment. But God certainly does not and will not change the laws of nature. Olam kaminhago noheg. The world behaves according to its laws. And so, once you start praying, that's, that cuts out a whole bunch of prayers that people might be making.
Is it, so in that case, again, there's all kinds of ways you could look at the Siddur, even a very traditional Siddur, and work through line by line and say, well, it's natural. It's human tendency to want this to be, or we've been told that this can be. So these are all expressions of our hearts out. But the question, I guess, is this in any way a karmic or mechanical or transactional relationship with the universe, where if I say these prayers enough or do them the right way, that this thing will happen inside the material?
So certainly when you read the text simply and straightforwardly and literally, that's the impression you get. And It shouldn't, and that's a mistake.
Okay.
In 2025, the 21st century, we're a quarter of the way through it, almost imagine. It's a mistake. That's not what we should be putting in front of people because they don't believe it. Or too many people don't believe it. Or most, however many it is, a lot don't believe it. And we shouldn't be pretending that they do or should. So, and there are other ways, and you can metaphorically, and if you're knowledgeable Jewishly, well, there's a midrash that says this, and there's a thing that says that, and there's a teaching that says that, and this is what's been, and this is what Maimonides said, and this is that's not what prayer is. That's good for an adult learning class. When you're in the synagogue and you're just trying to pray, okay, the Siddur is supposed to be an entry level kind of a book, right? And if you're putting stuff that an entry-level Jew, let's say, or a Christian or anybody, is going to look, no, I don't believe this. That's why I say it's a mistake.
Okay, so we were talking about the law, and I think we're going to lead. You mentioned the law in the tragedy test. You were thinking about the law and the spirit. For you, the spirit is often, so this is the place of the supernatural, the thing standing outside of the universe in many ways. For you, what does the word spirit evoke, or how are you using it?
Yeah, I don't look at it necessarily as a supernatural thing. I look at spirit as what animates all of us. We can take this from Genesis, that God breathed the Ruach, spirit, or into us, or the Nishmat Chayim, the breath of life. And we've used those words later times to understand soul, that we have a neshama, we have a spirit. We're more than just flesh and blood. There's something that, okay, we've got emotions, we've got love, we've got devotion, we've got selflessness, we've got chesed, we call it in Hebrew. We've got passions. without which life is, you can't say life is only law. Right. So there's law and there's spirit. And spirit is where, a lot of good things come from. It's also where, unfortunately, a lot of bad things come from. People have bad spirits, some of them, and so forth. Here, theologically, but here's the deal, and I wish it were different.
Okay.
You have law and spirit. God is law and God is spirit. Okay. Case of a tie, the law wins. I can have all the good spirit in the world. If I get hit by a bullet, it doesn't matter. The law of the bullet is going to prevail over my wonderful spirit. So and that's maybe a mature understanding there's both, but one is stronger than the other, and that's a challenge. By the way, that's not a resignation. That's a challenge.
Right.
Because the spirit, has a way. Well, can spirit stop a bullet? Not at the very end, but maybe to prevent someone from shooting the bullet in the first place, yes. I think we can understand things that way.
And is that how, would you describe, I find a lot of times in theology and philosophy, people are trying to name or categorize things. So some people look at a confusing field of Jewish theology and they're trying to place things. Well, this falls into, this is spiritual or supernatural. This is materialist. This is that. So we try to carve those things out. Would you say the people who wrote in the book are all kind of, as you're describing, materialists, that they believe the material world is kind of all that is observable, and that where does mystery or unknown or ignorance or the strangeness of all this universe come to in the book or in your thinking?
I wouldn't necessarily call everybody strictly materialist, again, because again, we all, and I started to say this a few moments ago. For me, it's law and spirit. That's my metaphor, paradigm, whatever. Out of the 27 different people, there are probably 30 different understandings. Not unusual for Jews.
Right.
But at the end, and we have 30 different ways of framing our understandings. Okay. But again, I think they all kind of come down to the same thing, that again, there's not an intervening God, that God does not directly answer prayers, that the world does go according to its rules, and so forth. And all of us agreed on that. And in whatever language, and we use different language to get there. You've asked me, so I've given you mine. But there's wide agreement, really, among pretty much all of the authors. Yeah.
You mentioned with the tragedy test, I came to this with questions, and I thought it was interesting because, again, the book, A God You Can Believe In, there's a learning guide that goes with both of them, which is probably not surprising for a pulpit rabbi who teaches classes, gives sermons, does divrei Torah, has to speak. So you're always thinking about, I'm taking something in, what can I put out? How could I involve people in a learning, teaching environment?
But yeah, the learning guide is, which I was actually the one who wrote it. So I thank you for singling that out.
Sure.
Yeah, it's about questions, because look, these are all, as we said earlier, all theology is personal, right? And everybody's coming to it from a different place. So rather than give proclamations and tell you what to believe, but if you think about those questions, I think, and if you want to take the time to do that, then it's going to lead you to certain places, and it'll confront your own beliefs and where they might fall short. And maybe you don't want to go there. Maybe you got enough going on in your life that you don't have time to, or which I understand. Okay, but it's there to challenge us. If you're not maybe quite happy with your belief, or you just got questions that bother you, that's a good place to go and to work it through, especially with another person, or 3 or 4. Or 10 or 12 or however many you'd like to do it, because it's difficult as a solo, but still it's worthwhile.
It is difficult as a solo. That raises so the book called A God you
A God we can believe in.
So again, what is it called? Oh, no, it's a God we can believe in. Okay, because this raises, the rabbis sometimes make a big deal about whether God has specifically called, what pronoun did God use in addressing us with this commandment? Was this a we commandment that it looks like a communal thing we're all supposed to do together? Or does it look like a you? Singular you're supposed to do this, so there's some way you're supposed to internalize this as personal. Is your feeling in this book that God is a communal exercise and not a what you believe?
That's an interesting question. I think it's both, right? I think in religion, be it, let's say, the monotheistic religions, there are certain shared assumptions on what and who God is. And at least in Judaism, there are so many descriptions and accounts and understandings of what God is. And nobody can embrace all of them. But we can find within our tradition, this is what I found, that you can find them if you're faced with the dilemma or the challenge that I was faced with. How do we explain a tragedy? Okay, and this goes back again a very long way. I write about it in the tragedy test. I start with Job. I'm not happy with what the book of Job does. It's take or leave it. I'm God, you're not, and.
But you thought it was a good one. I'll start with this, and I'll move on and get to somewhere else.
Well, let's see. In all honesty, I read it again. I says, okay, is this going to speak to me any more differently this time than last time? And I kind of call it shock and awe theology. That's what that Job is. Okay, maybe that works for you. It certainly didn't work for me. Let's go on from there. Anyway, we can go. You go back to the Bible itself, to the Torah, where Moses first encounters God at the burning bush, and God says, "Ehiyeh asher ehiyeh." Oh, incredible. God will be what God will be. All right, life will be what life will be. All right. And so there's an understanding, that we can embrace. And by the way, okay, for 500 points for you or any of your listeners, where in the liturgy does Ehiyeh Asher Ehiyeh occur? I know you're not going to get it, or you might.
Okay, I guarantee it's not. It's got to be in. Is it in some holiday thing? Are we talking Rosh Hashanah?
Oh, very good. I'll give you 300 for that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the Hineni prayer that the Chazan, the Shliach or the cantor, articulates before at a high point of the service. Here I am.
The only major instance in the traditional liturgy.
That's the only, and it's not even major. It's kind of buried away, long down below there. It's not even.
And is it because it's a whole block out of it, or they just pull that out and put
that? Asher he is thrown in there as one of God's names.
Wow.
And that the whole year, that's it. Okay. And which to me is incredible. Because it's a meaning and it's an understanding of God that I think a lot of people could embrace once you think about it or you put your head around it. So yeah. So there.
Okay, so this may be a tangent bouncing off a God we can believe in, or maybe it's not. There are a lot of innovators who've been all over the past few hundred years innovating inside the liturgy, basically saying, especially from the German reformers, we're struggling with these words. We don't think we believe what these words mean anymore. The words need to change. And all the way to people who really tried to, like Rabbi Rhinus at HUC, who did his book Polydoxy, which blew me away 20 years ago, which is like, is there a way we could write the English, and the Hebrew's fine, but the way we could write the English so anyone on the spectrum of Jewish belief could all pray together and they could believe the words that are being said? Do you think that's possible, that we could have something that answers to everybody? No. Okay.
I wish.
His was an impossible task. Why did man?
I wish, but no. Because, frankly, there are those who are, and listen, I've been speaking about this subject for a number of years now. And since the first book was published, which was 2018, so that's 6-7 years. I've got a lot of friends who are colleagues, dear friends, conservative movement, and some even Orthodox and what have you. They've got their way of praying, and they stick to it. Some of them are even Orthodox rabbis. This has been fascinating. When I've spoken about God understandings, they were wow. They would listen with and they would hear it. In the Orthodox world, whatever else you want to, I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but they're very much concerned with halacha, with Jewish law, and community. They don't place that much emphasis on God. Prayer is what the community does. Okay, but once you start unpacking it a little bit, there's some fascinating things going on there. But leave that aside. My conservative rabbi friends, they pray the way they want to pray, and it's meaningful to them. God bless them. They're not going to change, even if they acknowledge whatever points I'm making, and so on and so forth. But for everybody else, for everybody to whom the liturgy does not speak, yes, your question was, is it possible to write English translations of that? And the answer is yes. And just as, and I did not set you up for this, as we can both attest, but a number of us are working on such a project at the moment. When we get it finished, we should live so long, Rabbi Amenu, as we say, speedily in our day. I'll come back to you and we can talk about that. But it is in process for exactly the reasons that you're saying, because we want to be able to put in front of people a siddur, a Jewish prayer book, that they'll look at it, and instead of saying, I don't believe that, I just don't get, no, I'm sorry, thank you very much, Rabbi, I'll come back for the next bar mitzvah whenever I have to. But instead of that, how much better it would be for people to sit there and say, this speaks to me. This makes sense. I can believe this. All right. And I can make this a greater part of my life than I had been until now even. So this is a project that we're working on, and we have several of the authors from A God We Can Believe In, and some others who are working with us on this. And and it's been a healthy process so far.
Is there anybody, again, thinking about a God that sort of doing away with a couple of what, you use the term mythological ideas or old-fashioned ideas, or ideas that simply we look out at the world today, and with our understanding of how the universe operates, they don't seem to make literal sense. So then, maybe you want to do away with this. The argument that it's always a slope toward either non-God humanistic Judaism. So why don't you just get rid of the God, and then couldn't you just be the people? Judaism as civilization. It's our rituals, it's our history, it's our tribalness. Or atheism. Like, you could have just said there's no God, and then been a happy little atheist and bopped along. Why did you why did you need to retain God?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Well, problem is I believe in God. And so do my colleagues. We do.
Yeah.
So we're not willing to say be a secular humanist or be an atheist. And as I indicated before, I can think of God as law and spirit and with intellectual integrity. And why should I get rid of something that I can believe in? That I can uphold honestly, and I can defend. And so forth. So, yeah, I know there are people who have done that, and you're absolutely correct that God is a very freighted term.
Sure.
However, okay, that's what we've got. We've got to address it, and we're, hopefully trying to address it with writings like this.
What is your vision for the use of the book? Again, as I mentioned, I thought it was very interesting because it comes with a handy. Oftentimes there's some tossed off questions. If you do a book study, here's 10 questions about what'd you think about this and what'd you think about that. But they were much more structured. Is your vision for this, or did this come out of a class you offered, or did you envision this should be a class? People should wrestle with this together in a group and discuss.
Yeah, I think that was it. I think that was it. Okay. We had all these wonderful contributors, each one of them a thought leader, certainly in their own community, sometimes well beyond. And why should people just read what they wrote? Oh, okay. But yeah, let's do some learning about this. Let's really roll up our sleeves and see what this is about. So yeah, we wrote it. We said for an educated or a questioning Jewish layperson. And that's the audience of the intended audience of the book. So if you've got a synagogue near you that wants to adopt it as a course, by all means, buy it. May I give my commercial? Buy it from richardagler.com as opposed to from some random billionaire, because the proceeds then go to the Tally Fund, which is a charity that we've established in memory of our late daughter. And there's a shelter for abused, trafficked, exploited, etc. girls in Nairobi, Kenya, that was named after Talia. It's the Talia Agler Girls Shelter. And she interned there as a college student in its previous.
I was going to ask about the connection.
So there's the connection, and we maintain that connection. And you can read about it at tallyfund.org or at richardagler.com. You can find the menu that leads you there. But anyway, you buy the book, buy it from me, and I'll send you a personally signed copy. I'll send 10 of them to your class, whatever you like. And again, the proceeds go to the Tally Fund as opposed to somebody else. Yeah.
Would you tell? I have never set. We see these funds the funds and foundations and things in memory of people are everywhere. They're especially maybe because I'm Jewish and I notice the Jewish ones. I think there's a real tendency in Judaism to somebody did work or somebody meant something to us. So what do? We create a self-replicating like mitzvah machine or a self-replicating good deed, good work in the universe machine that will keep going in their name to have something named after you. Could you tell me maybe how the Tally Fund sort of developed?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, of course, initially, people at the funeral, people are always asking, what can I contribute to and what have you. So there wasn't a Tally Fund at that time, but the institution where she worked and with whom she kept in touch, through her career, she was on the East Africa desk of the company that she worked for. And she kept in touch with the woman whose name I'll say, Edith Morojo, an outstanding person. Tally connected with her and said, this woman's doing good work. And we knew Tally was an excellent judge of character. And anyway, so we said, part of what we want to send, people want to contribute in her memory, we did that. I think 2 or 3 months after the funeral, Edith came to the United States for the first time. She was invited to speak at a women's empowerment conference or something like that in Washington. And she schnorred a plane ticket to visit us in South Florida. And we met her at the Palm Beach airport. And we figured we would, and she was just going to fly in and fly out. And that was all she was able to do. And we figured, of course, we're going to meet her. We had been in touch with her. We figured we would laugh, cry, hug, and tell stories, which is what we did. And then she tells us that this new girls' shelter that she had just established, that she had actually talked to Tally about the month before she died, she was given a name in Tally's memory, the Talia Agler Girls' Shelter. We were, as you might imagine, blown away. And okay, that was the birth of the Tally Fund. It was perfect. And we've, been able to be supportive of it, and it's grown and it's prospered. In fact, Edith was just this past year, the shelter was visited by the U.S. ambassador to Kenya, Meg Whitman, all the places she could have gone in the country to highlight, efforts in counter trafficking. She went there. And then Edith was feted at the State Department in Washington again by the Secretary of State at the time last June, Antony Blinken. And so the recognition that the program has received has really been quite extraordinary, and we're very grateful for that. It's Edith's work and vision that we've been able to support with love, and we've gone over there several times to do whatever help we can do. So that's how it kind of came to be. But and this is part of our healing, as you might imagine. Many people have told us because of this, she still lives in a way that's correct, and not the way that any of us would have wanted, obviously, but in a way that's meaningful nonetheless. So we're grateful, and it is a mitzvah project. And I'm sure you've heard the saying, and I'm sure many of your listeners have as well. If you save one life, it's as if you've saved an entire world. And that's the motto of the Tally Fund, saving the world one life at a time. So, yeah, we've been blessed and able to do a lot of good work in that regard. So, yeah.